Hello, American Library in Paris readers and audiences. I am Rachel Donadio, and I'm the administrator of the American Library in Paris Annual Book Award. I'm very pleased to be speaking today with Amanda Bestor-Siegal about her novel, The Caretakers, which is one of two fiction works on this year's American Library in Paris Book Award shortlist, and it's the only novel. It is your first novel, Amanda, so congratulations on that. This is a book that's set in Maison La Rue, a suburb of Paris. Tell us a little bit about what this book is about and what our readers should know.
Yeah, so The Caretakers is it's a book about a community of women in a invented suburb of Paris, a wealthy suburb where it focuses on specifically the au pair community and 6 points of view in that town. So it's three French women in the town, a woman who employs, a mother who employs an au pair, a French teacher, French teacher for the au pairs, and then the daughter of the aforementioned mother, and then 3 au pairs who come from the States. And so the book opens with a sort of dramatic incident that happened to one of the children while under the care of his au pair. And then the book kind of moves through the stories of these 6 women and their lives, their perspectives. And it's sort of it's a bit of a misdirect because it opens with the death of a child, which with an au pair who's been arrested. And so we're kind of set up to wonder if this is sort of going to be a mystery and we're going to find out what happened. And the reader does find out what happened, but it takes a much more sort of intimate look at the psychology of these people. It's much more about the ways in which their cultural and also just emotional misunderstandings with each other kind of lead them to continually miss each other in a way that ends up having really fatal consequences. So very much looking at kind of the au pair community, but in a greater lens, looking at the US and France and the roles of these women who are all in various ways in these caretaking roles, even though they some of them are not only not great at caretaking, but also really, really need to be taking care of themselves and are not getting that. And so what happens when you put all these women in that situation together?
I think you did a really beautiful job developing all of these characters in the book. The Caretakers, it's a novel. There's underage drinking and marital infidelity and the sometimes quite difficult lives of foreign au pairs who come to Paris and work for French families. There are questions of race and class thrown in. There are the November 13th terrorist attacks. This is really about the lives of the au pairs and the families that they work with from 2014 to 2018. And why that slice of time? Were you in Paris at that time? Tell us a little bit about, why then?
Yeah, so I moved to Paris in 2014, and I was an au pair. So in the end, after I was, I had finished that first school year, I worked a bunch of other jobs, but that first year as an au pair was really seminal for me in terms of just seeing this community of all of these young women who come from all over, with, I think, a very sort of idealized view in a lot of ways of Paris. I think that's still a sort of worldwide phenomenon, that Paris has this kind of cultural just legacy and it's just on a pedestal for a lot of people. And so within the au pair community specifically, I was looking at a lot of young women who left a varied range of backgrounds, some very, very privileged, some not so at all, but ultimately all were kind of looking for something in France that I think in a lot of ways France was never able to give. And I say that as someone who deeply, Paris is my home and is the place where I became who I am, but I don't think any place can kind of give people that sort of that inner security or that inner care that a lot of those young women were looking for. So for me, the time period was was partly just because that was my experience of Paris in being there in that moment, but also for me, the terrorist attacks were actually a really big part of not only of my life there, but also of the themes that I was exploring in this book. So thinking about one, I mean, there's so much to talk about there, but I think the main reason that those ended up playing an important role in the book for me is because as a sort of backdrop of my own time in Paris, I think that was an event that made me think a lot about what it means to be French and what it means to be part of a country that is under attack, and who sort of has not claim, but kind of can say that they belong to that collective pain, because it is something collective. And I think it brings up a lot of complicated feelings for foreigners. And I think there's been a lot of moments throughout history that have shown this, but I was experiencing it myself as a foreigner in Paris, and especially for a community of people who so desperately want to feel at home and want to belong, how complicated that gets when part of that means feeling like your values are under attack, and do you have the right to feel that way? And so for me, those were never going to be a big part of the plot. I did not want to go there at all, but it was kind of a backdrop of the themes I was exploring in terms of just nationality and identity, and what it means to belong to a place, and sort of the emotional extent to which we try to fit ourselves in, even when it's actually quite complicated and murky. Yeah.
I think you handled that really well in the book as a backdrop, but as you say, as something that causes these foreign au pairs to think about, they don't feel like they're part of the culture that was attacked, but then they are, because there they are in Paris. And I also think that the book does talk a lot about, or explores, as you say, the sense that Paris, we move here, it's amazing and romantic and great, but actually it's indifferent. It doesn't really want us back necessarily. And it's kind of a complicated thing, especially for these foreign women who come. And the nanny role, as has been explored in, other books, I'm sure Leila Slimani's The Perfect Nanny is mentioned sometimes. That's a quite different plot than this one, although there is, some similarities. But really, it's a very complicated human relationship to be a nanny, to arrive in someone else's family and try to navigate that. I was actually one briefly, and I think it's one of the most difficult work environments I've ever faced, just in emotional terms. I mean, is that something that you felt you were grappling with and addressing in the book as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think in a lot of ways, for me, that experience of being an au pair felt like this kind of microcosm of being a foreigner in a place at all, which is to say that there's this intense desire to belong, and in some ways you can be so immersed, live in France, you're speaking the language, you're getting really immersed in the culture, but you're still always just outside of it. And I think that's kind of the forever feeling of being foreign. And so looking at the au pair life, it's just blown up because it's within a family. So you're literally living with them. You're, in a lot of ways, you're part of the family. For those of us, I had very young children. So they, I think saw me as a big sibling in a lot of ways. Like they weren't necessarily thinking of me as an employee or as, an external person, but I was, and that's inherent in the experience, no matter how close you are to your host family, no matter how, how well they treat you, your relationship, you're still an employee. And I think that that's a really complicated, kind of fraught dynamic. And especially, with nannies, it's like nannies can be of all ages. Au pairs are really concentrated on a very young population. And they're foreign. And so there's this kind of like, I think, dependence on the family that au pairs specifically have, and that they're really children still, but they're taking care of children, and, relying on the host parents to kind of be their parents in this country, but also the people who, provide their health insurance and hopefully pay them on time. And it's just a really, it's a tricky relationship, and it depends so much on the specific people involved. And I think that's one of the many reasons why it never occurred to me to write a book that was just kind of concentrated on one family, because it just feels like there was such an array of experiences that I witnessed, that I was privy to just by being in that community.
And all the different points of views, and then these young women who take care of the small children, and then the parents rely on them, but they rely on the parent. I mean, it is a lot of different dependencies as you write about. For a novel that has, you trace these 6 different women, can you talk a little bit about some of the characters? And I know that for our audience, some people will have read the book, some people won't, but maybe tell us a little bit about some of the characters who are at the heart of this book.
Yeah, so, well, the first one we are introduced to is Geraldine, who's she's the French teacher for all of the au pairs in this particular suburb. And she has a very close relationship with her students and is kind of grappling with, you know, in some ways why she wants to be so close to them, why that's so important to her. You know, as with all the characters, it sort of unfolds over the course of the book, but there's a lot there in terms of her. She was previously married to an American man, so a lot of cultural sort of walls there that that her character kind of explores, and as a result, she's really sort of drawn to these foreign women who've come here and are so vulnerable in the absence of her own family. And then there's Lou, who is an au pair who she is fired in the middle of the night. That's the first time we meet her. And she's pretty incompetent as an au pair. I think it's pretty understandable why the family might have wanted to let her go. But yeah, she's a character who I think, you know, very much moves to France with that kind of, I'm going to go to France and become a different person and fix everything. And it turns out that she still brings all of her with her. And then we've got Charlotte, who is the mother of the child who has the accident at the very beginning of the book. And she is kind of on the surface when we meet her, seems like a very sort of socialite, just kind of social climbing woman who cares much more about her sort of appearance and community than about her children. And that kind of gets complicated as we get to know her and get to know where she came from, and how she ended up in this family. So that's just a glimpse of some of them. There's a couple other au pairs. We meet the very troubled teenage daughter of Charlotte as well. And I think, you know, they're all very, very different women, and we go really deep into each of their psychologies and their backgrounds, but they are all very much tied together in terms of, these are all people who I think have a hard time caring for others and accepting care from others, but they are all in caretaking roles. So they're definitely not the sort of classic example, I think, of a mother or a nanny or a teacher, but they're the real people who I know, and I wanted to explore that particular situation of that, you know, what happens when those expectations are put on those particular people.
You said at the beginning of this conversation that Paris is a place where you kind of became yourself in a certain way. In writing this book, did you emerge with different thoughts and feelings and perspectives on Paris, on France, also on the United States? Tell us a little bit about that, you know, the 2 different cultures that are pushed and pulled together in the book, and also in those of us who are Americans and then, you know, come to be in France. Yeah,
I think the book was really a place where I was exploring a lot of what I was observing and learning while living in France. So it was almost like I'd learn it in real life and then it would go in the book. But I think my own kind of journey with France is I had my own personal history with it, with my family. My parents lived there for a long time, and that's where they met. And when they were much younger. But even with that family history, I think I still had some of those kind of, you know, not necessarily cliche ideas about Paris, but still this idea that it would solve problems for me. So I would move there, and some stuff that I was running away from would just evaporate. And what I found instead is this, this really complicated culture, in the sense that it's quite subtle, the differences. This isn't, it's, in terms of all the places you could go in the world, the US and France are not like alien planets, but they are, they're very different in very subtle ways. And I think there are many ways in which I feel continually more at home in France. There's just a very different culture around formality, around privacy, around the way relationships develop very slowly. I think there's a lot of moments in the book where people kind of make fun of some Americanisms of just, one example is like, I think Americans, the way we speak tends to be very enthusiastic and sort of hyperbolic. And I don't think we realize that necessarily when we're in the States, but when you're, in the context of France, walking around, my French roommate would make fun of me because I would call things amazing. And, she'd be like, not everything's amazing. It's just okay. And just those kinds of like differences in positivity and sort of the way we interact. I think writing the book allowed me to sort of explore a lot of the more subtle differences between people and the ways that those can lead to sort of really, like, at their core kind of should be harmless misunderstandings, but they can cause people to really kind of miss each other. But I think it also allowed me to really have an appreciation. I think when I moved to France, I was very done with the US in some ways. And I think what ended up happening is I developed a kind of appreciation for the parts of me that I didn't realize that I had. I think wherever you grow up, there's going to be parts that, no matter how you feel about the place you come from, that is part of you. And I think in some ways living in France helped me over a very long period of time appreciate kind of those American parts of myself, while still still allowing myself to be with the parts of France that do feel better to me. So yeah, it was kind of an exploration ground.
Yeah, directness and oversharing versus reserve and, madame, distance. At a certain point in the book, you talk about that one of the characters says that in France, people are coconuts. They're kind of tough on the outside, but kind of gushy on the inside. And then the Americans are like peaches. They're a little soft on the outside, but really hard in the core. Yeah. That's kind of an exaggeration, but I do think there's something to it, and that you explore in The Caretakers about where these characters from different countries intersect and emerge. And yeah,
they're so different. And when I first would visit the US, when I was first living in France, I would go to coffee shops and restaurants, and everyone's hi, I'm Janine, how are you? And I'd be so annoyed and like, oh, I want to go back to France. Everyone's more honest there. But by the end, like, after living in France for 4 years, I'd come to the US and like, hi, Janine, thank you for smiling. So it's just so different. And I think it's just really amazing to get to know two cultures so intimately, to actually kind of see beneath those sort of surface level like interactions that either seem overly warm or overly cold or whatever it is, but there's something else going on there that's actually really powerful for both, Yeah.
And I think you explore that really well in the book. Is there anything else that you would like to add about the caretakers, about the questions that you wanted to pose in this novel, in the process, in the journey that this book took you on in writing it?
I think one thing that I think has surprised some readers, and I've been thinking about it a lot recently, actually, is just that it is a pretty dark book. I think that surprises people, and I'm not sure if it is because of these ideas that a lot of readers might have about Paris or a book set in Paris. I think because I am so interested in exploring that kind of desire to belong to something that's a bit idealized, and to kind of go underneath that and figure out sort of the darker underbelly of that. The result is that this is not a Paris that is kind of one that we see a lot represented in terms of, at least by American authors, I should say. And so I guess I would just say, I'm sorry for the darkness, but I also think that there is, I think that the reason I wrote this book is because I really wanted to feel, I think, less alone in some of those kinds of the feelings of maybe isolation or of trying to figure out where home was. I think that's a really, really powerful feeling for a lot of people. And so, yeah, I just hope that it really helps. It really helps some people, and I know it has kind of give themselves a little more space to explore not only how they, how you feel about where you come from or the place you live, but also the people around you, the kind of roles that especially women are going to be expected to do within a family, within a community, and that it's okay to not always be great at that stuff naturally.
Don't apologize. It's an honest account and really beautifully done. So congratulations again, Amanda Bestor-Siegal, for The Caretakers, your first novel, and on the short list of this year's American Library in Paris Annual Book Award. It's really been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope that our audiences will go and read your book.
So thank you for having me and talking to me.